I'm Anthony Lacavera. Over the last 20 years as a founder, CEO, tech investor, and TV host, I've had the privilege of building relationships with incredible individuals that are driving positive impact globally. Trailblaze brings you these conversations with innovators across all walks of life who are carving through uncharted territory with new and unique approaches to design and build a better future for our world. Trailblaze highlights their personal journeys with stories of resilience, business and personal challenges, and the wisdom gained through the eyes of these leaders who are striving to challenge the status quo. Let's get into today's episode.
Amber, thanks for joining me today. I'm really excited to talk to you about your whole history and what an incredible journey it's been. And obviously, congratulations on your success to date. I'm really excited to talk to you about it. I'd love to take it right from the top because AmberMac Media has been a great success. But I know it's never a straight line. So I'd love to take it back to the beginning and hear how you got started and how you got to where you are.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and probably we share some similarities in terms of the directions we've gone in our careers, in the sense that I was working as a journalist within mainstream media, and I was very frustrated, Tony, by what went on in terms of my daily routine, and it just felt a little suffocating in terms of not being at all entrepreneurship, which is not a surprise. But secondly, it felt a little bit like Groundhog Day, because waking up and doing the same thing every day is not something that I necessarily wanted to do. And so I always believed in the future of media being something where there was a bit of a power shift in terms of individuals being able to craft and create their own content, especially as technology got more affordable. So a few years ago, we started AmberMac Media, and then we've been producing content for some of the world's biggest brands. And funny enough, we still end up working with a lot of the mainstream media outlets, but it's a much different relationship than being an employee on the ground, as I'm sure you can imagine.
Well, that first moment, though, where you jump from the journalist world and really sort of, I call it an employee type role into your own venture, what was the sequence of decision-making steps that you went through to be able to have the confidence to make that leap? And I think so many people are just like, have great ideas, but as you know, never take the leap and execute on them. So I'd love to hear about that.
Well, I had started my career at Tech TV, and then I moved to City TV, and there was an acquisition that took place, and a new media company took us over. And they didn't really believe in the future of new media and technology. And so a show that I was doing clearly didn't have a long shelf life, and I got the impression very quickly that the internet wasn't something that they were going to invest time in. They're probably laughing now because
yeah, right.
clearly it didn't work out so well for them.
Wide myth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the writing was kind of on the wall. And so for me, I think I had the confidence in the direction that things were going because I had started my career in San Francisco. I worked at a couple of .coms. I really had a good sense from being there on the ground in terms of the future and where things were heading. And so I had the confidence as far as being able to have a bit of an understanding about where potentially the future was going when it came to media. And the second part of it, quite frankly, is that my parents were always really entrepreneurship, and they had a number of different businesses, and I always had a little bit of that entrepreneurial bug. So I felt as though, this was just a great opportunity to step into the world of entrepreneurship. And I wasn't really afraid about losing anything because I'm not really a materialistic person. So I was okay if it didn't work out and I ended up working at Starbucks. I would be a really good barista, and
right.
I would be cool with that.
Well, that's amazing to have that perspective, right? Because so many people struggle right with that point of like, wow, I really need money and I really need to make a certain amount of money in order to be happy. So I think like crossing that chasm is in and of itself a critical step. And certainly from my own experience, starting with zero as well, like it's a big leap to take when you realize you actually do need money. And if you don't have any, life is kind of more difficult.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I mean, I was one of those Canadians. There's so many who had almost $40,000 in student loans. And thankfully, in those early days in San Francisco, because the US dollar was worth so much, I was able to pay them off relatively quickly.
Oh, good for you.
I just felt like I was kind of starting from, scratch. I had already put in some, significant time and energy into paying off debt. And so for me, it was just the right time to kind of launch something new.
And you've had a pretty diverse set of achievements and set of activities since you really got started on your own. How did it evolve from where you really initially started to today, AmberMac Media?
Well, I think, at first it started as something that we were doing on a much smaller scale, right? I don't think brands had the confidence when we started in 2015 to really jump into this world where they were going to hire an independent media company, right? Like that was a
Right.
terrifying thing. So
Right. A
I
lot of
think
downside.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So
Yeah.
so even though like I had done, work as an independent contractor leading up to that point, when we started our own business, it was just again a little bit on the small side in terms of some of the clients that we worked with. But eventually what we started to see is that many of the clients recognized that there was a quality production when it came to our content, and they were willing to experiment a little bit and work with us. And so we were able to build that trust over time, and that became critically important. And, from where we came in terms of the early days of producing content to where we are now, it's been a constant evolution and learning
No doubt.
process. And that's, as you know, I mean, that's so key right now. Whereas if you look at mainstream television, there's not a lot of innovation that's really taken place. They're doing things the same way they used to, except
Remarkable.
now, like everybody's on video doing stuff on Zoom. The costs have come down, but they still have the heavy burden of, in infrastructure and investment that they just can't get away from. But we didn't have that legacy in terms of starting our business, clearly.
And those like initial pitches that you made to secure those great content customers, clients that you have today. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because you're going in, you did have a great background track record, but you hadn't done this before. You were an independent. There's that age-old expression: you never get fired for hiring IBM, and you weren't IBM. And so there's all that inertia in big corporations to trying something new. How did you break through all of that?
Yeah, I think it becomes pretty clear when you potentially start working with a company and you're pitching that company that they're not necessarily risk takers and they don't necessarily want to try anything new. But the story that I remember specifically was we did some work in the early days for Intel, which is clearly a huge company. And we had this idea where we would do a Facebook Live series and we would live stream interviews with entrepreneurs. Now, most large corporations would have said, there's no way, one, we're going to do this with a small company. Two, we're definitely not doing it live. Like we'll tape it and we'll put it out there into the world. And then three, I think it was just the risk in terms of not being able to have kind of this large company that would take accountability if something went wrong. But they were one of those organizations in the early days who really believed in having conversations online and producing content online. And so they basically, accepted this proposal that we had. We started doing this live streaming series, and believe it or not, Tony, we still work with them today, and they're very
Amazing.
open to risk taking. Now, we know in the Canadian marketplace, there's a lot of companies that aren't, and we don't really play with them because of that exact reason.
Yeah, right. There's just so much hesitation to trying anything. But when you think about what you broke through with Intel in terms of bringing lower cost content but high quality content production to the table, what were some of the learnings that you gained in those early experiences that have allowed you to really replicate the model?
Well, I think, in terms of the content business, it was really trying to figure out, who we are and what we were doing, right? And defining what it was. And I still to this day struggle with that a little bit. But it is difficult to have someone like myself who is speaking as a representative in the media, but also creating content with brands and having partnerships. Like it's a muddy kind of world, right?
Right.
And so for me in those early days, I think one of the most important things that we did was just to figure out that we were in the business of demystifying technology and business content for the average viewer, right? And we didn't care if it was a live stream or an Instagram live or a podcast series. We would figure out what the avenue was to get there. And I think once we got over that hurdle to realize we could deliver on these multiple platforms, then it gave us a real opportunity to be this kind of tiny shop that people could work with, where we actually decided afterwards what the end product was going to look like depending on some of the goals. And it is true to say that, like, if you're a large TV network, you do TV, and if you try to get into podcasting, you probably suck at it.
Yeah.
And you can't pivot like that, right?
Right,
And
right.
we're
So
able to kind of pivot back and forth between these worlds. And I think that's probably the biggest lesson over time.
I think that makes sense, right? You have the strength of being able to be fast, nimble, pivot quickly. You're not bringing a lot of legacy infrastructure along with you, so you can really quickly adapt to the current moment and the current needs of the partner, right?
Yeah, yeah, you're exactly. I mean, even just investment in technology, right? If you think about walking into a big broadcaster, you walk into one of these companies and you see, they've invested so much in equipment and infrastructure, even though what they're doing can be done in a studio like ours in downtown Toronto for a fraction of the price. They've invested so much in that those resources and that infrastructure that it's hard for them to back away from that.
Yeah,
But if you were
exactly.
starting a media company today in 2022 and you've had experience doing just this, you realize to get a show up and running, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of time, a lot of energy. But you don't need a giant office space and a team of hundreds of
Right.
people, right? And that's the shift that I think independent media companies have made, and there's lots of opportunity ahead.
I think there's no question about it. Well, so I want to talk to you about the conversations I'm having are all about like, what are the biggest challenges that we all, both you and I and everyone that's taking this entrepreneurial leap, we always face some significant challenges along the way. Can you share what was sort of the most challenging moment for you in your career, and how did you break through those obstacles, professional or personal? Like we all encounter these big barriers, and
Sure.
we all have the challenge in front of us. So how did you break through it?
Well, I always struggle with this question because I'm such a news junkie that I absorb so much news that I recognize all of the struggles people are going through in the world. And so I sort of see the challenge of being an entrepreneur more as kind of an opportunity. And I'm grateful that I can be there. And if I can't do this, it's fine. But I do recognize like the personal challenge piece. So for me, probably the biggest hurdle I had to overcome was in San Francisco in my early 20s during the dot-com boom. Working at some of these technology companies, there was a lot of partying and excessive behavior and drinking and drugs. And I actually quit drinking completely when I was 25 years old. And it was really, coming out of that environment where I just felt like it was chaotic and sort of out of control. And that was probably the best decision I ever made because I don't know, sobriety, at least for me, some people can go have a glass of wine. I was not one of those people. So sobriety for me just allows me to, just own the decisions that I make in a really clear and conscious way. So, everything that I do, I'm aware that I'm doing it in a sober mind frame and kind of owning those decisions. So that to me was probably the biggest hurdle of deciding that, there's alcoholism in my family. I come from the East Coast. Some relatives have struggled with alcohol, and just deciding that, that is not the path that I'm going to go down because I know where that ends up. And you end up either destroying relationships or you end up dead. And these are realities of alcoholism. And I just really made a firm stand and quit on a dare from someone who said I couldn't quit drinking for a month. And I am a little bit competitive. I quit for a month.
Sure you're not the right person to challenge or something like that.
I know. I quit for a month and I started journaling and I realized, oh my gosh, like I'm so much happier being sober. Like I could be a sober person. I never knew that sober people existed. So this is super exciting. And here we are.
Well, it's really amazing to hear because of course so many people just get caught right in the social fabric of whether it's Silicon Valley or anywhere else, right? It's hard to get out of that because you feel like you're going to give up something, you're going to give up some relationships and some interactions that are helping you advance your career. But of course, that's just not true, right? You end up with a whole different construct and can realize even more because, as you say, you have your wits about you all the time.
Yeah, I mean, and you're exactly right. I mean, I think networking and socializing, I mean, so much of it is done that way in terms of meeting at bars and having drinks. And I totally appreciate that. And I know people have fun doing that responsibly. But again, I think if you struggle with that responsibly part of the equation, it's a good option to know that there's lots of sober people out there. I don't know if you saw Super Pumped, which is the story of Uber that is a series that is out right now. Well, one of the young women, she is a sober woman within the company. And I thought that was interesting just to, see that people are starting to decide that sobriety is an option, and
Yep.
it's not for everybody, but it can definitely change the trajectory of your life.
And did you decide to come back? Were you always planning on coming back to Canada? Or you, because so many people, of course, as you know, like, and one of the things that I talk a lot about is we have 350,000, close to 400,000 now Canadians living and working in Silicon Valley, contributing massively to the success of the United States. It's not often that people come back. So I'd love to hear what your rationale was for coming back, and what made Canada, what is it about Canada that made you want it to be home long term?
Yeah, I wish I had a really good
Yeah.
story for you, but so here's how it goes. I was in the States for 4 years. I got engaged to an American down there, and he dumped me 3 months before my wedding. So I could have stayed in the US, definitely, but at the time I decided to come back to Canada, and I was really, really fortunate because in that time, Tony, and you'll remember this, like 1999 to 2003, if you had spent time working in Silicon Valley as well as Boston, and you came back to Canada, you could write your own ticket and work wherever
Yeah.
you wanted to work.
Yeah.
Like, people really took you seriously, as they should. I was managing a team of 10 people in the marketing department at 23, 24 years old, right? I had enormous responsibility. So I came back and started working for Microsoft, and on contract with them for a couple of years. And I started to recognize that there were really big opportunities in Canada, particularly in Toronto, and just kind of stayed put because I had that advantage of having worked in the US, and it was hugely advantageous at that time. If I tried to work at Microsoft coming out of school here in Canada and making that
Right.
direct path, they would have laughed me right out of the interview room.
I totally agree, right? Which I think is kind of unfortunate, because there is so many great opportunities in Canada, but people have this perception that somehow you're gonna, get some experience in the U.S. that you can't get in Canada. And I'm really starting to challenge that, because the Canadian tech ecosystem, as you know, you're immersed in it, is really starting to mature. And on that note, I really wanted to talk to you about, like, it's been 20 plus years that you've been covering technology, investigating technologies, trying new technologies. What is it that you're sort of most excited about these days in what's coming down the pike in new technologies that we're all going to enjoy?
Honestly, I think there's a number of different things, but over the past few years, I have been speaking a lot about artificial intelligence in particular. And I know AI is always such a broad term, but I think in the context of how it's able to shape our future, particularly in healthcare, we've seen over the past 2 years of the pandemic that, healthcare's never been more important. And we see the application of artificial intelligence in such unique ways to be able to be an aid for specialists
Yeah.
within healthcare. And that really excites me, just the thought that going to see the doctor and getting any type of scan, which people have to do regularly for one reason or another, knowing they have this incredible intelligence to be able to be an aid for the doctor to help to diagnose potentially, any type of cancer is one example. That to me is really, really probably the most interesting part of technology and where we're going. So I think AI has so many applications and such a bad reputation for, potentially taking away jobs, but we never really
Right.
talk about it in the context of how is this actually going to enhance your work and make you better at what you do and use those human skills that are so unique and so special.
I really think that's a great example, right, in the healthcare system, where a machine can look at an image or any kind of scan and make some pretty amazing predictions or diagnoses about what's going on, and really enable the practitioner to get a bunch of information that they wouldn't have necessarily got, because that machine has the benefit of a million other scans that it never forgets, that it's always seen, and has cataloged them all, indexed them all, and can make really interesting diagnoses. So I'm amazed actually at some of the inertia to adoption of something like that, right? I realize the healthcare system is incredibly complex, and I realize we're talking about people's lives. So it's not just an easy thing to say, hey, let's just throw a new technology at it. I realize it's got to take time. But even in that context, I still feel like we're moving too slowly. in
I
that
think you're
example.
right. I mean, honestly, I think about this all the time because I do so much speaking and I've spoken to groups in healthcare before and they're terrified about this technology. They think it's going to take their jobs entirely. I
Yeah.
mean, it's as insane as to think that, hey, I'm going to be replaced by some type of AI bot who can read a prompter. Maybe if I was a news reader, but I'm not, because I recognize like what can't machines and robots do? And that's a question that we all have to ask ourselves is like, where can I add that value, critical thinking, collaboration, innovation, all of those things. But I think at the end of the day, Tony, and I know you don't have this problem, so I can say this to you, I think people are so full of fear. Like they're
Yeah, I
just,
remember.
they're
You're
driven
right.
by fear. And like,
You're right.
I look at, President Zelensky in Ukraine, and I think, listen, unless you're in a bunker trying to fight off Russia, like most of us are able to deal with fear in a way that is manageable. We shouldn't be so afraid of things that aren't going to impact us in such significant ways. But fear just seems to take over. And I think, in Canada, that is especially true. I noticed the difference right off the bat when I came back here.
Yeah, it's a huge problem, right? It consumes people. And I think that's a great example, right? Like when people like we have something right in front of us today where not that it wasn't happening in Syria and a whole bunch of other places before Iraq, there's been human life lost all, everywhere throughout the history of humanity, I guess, right? But we have this example in front of us right now with the Ukraine where literally people's lives are being threatened and or lost every day. And we still have this fear consuming us about something about, well, if there's a new technology, maybe it's going to transform my life in some really negative way. Instead of like thinking like, wow, what opportunities does that new technology give me to spend more time with my family, have a better quality of life? What are all the ways that it can enhance my life? And actually even what are all the better ways it can help me do my own job in a better way? And in the healthcare example, how can I improve outcomes for people, right? It's interesting that we don't start from the positive in that regard. We start from the negative.
Yeah, and also, Tony, I mean, think about it. Like, what is your goal when you go into healthcare? Like, I'm going to make an assumption here that it is to help as many people as possible. Will AI help you get there? Like, can an AI machine or computer scan more x-rays than you ever could in a day? Absolutely. It can work 24/7 and it doesn't need coffee, right? So if the technology is something that helps you get to that ultimate goal of helping more people,
Yeah,
why do you continue to be so fearful about it? Because it's going to impact you personally. And this is, just the rise of the individual and how we're so self-absorbed we can't see, beyond our
totally,
own noses, right? And
totally.
it's a huge issue. And I see
Yeah,
this in every industry.
yeah. I think I agree. What do you think about switching gears a little bit? What do you think about metaverse? Are you buying real estate in the metaverse?
No, I'm only owning physical real estate. Okay, you're not going to change me.
Okay.
I just can't stop laughing about
Yeah.
the news that Meta has a physical store outside of
Yeah.
San Francisco where you can go experience the metaverse. Like, isn't the point of the metaverse
Right.
that I don't have to go anywhere?
Right.
But anyway,
Yeah.
I digress. I think it's exciting. I just did an event yesterday on mixed reality, and mixed reality in the context of training within the business world. And that's fascinating to me. I mean, we can use healthcare an example. We can use aviation. I mean, there's so many ways in terms of how mixed reality could help to train professionals in these
Yeah.
immersive environments so that, hey, if you're about to crash a plane, like it's not a real plane. And if you're about to do heart surgery, it's not a real heart, right?
Right.
These are all critically important. And so to me, that's where it's exciting. Am I excited to go in and buy like a Birkin bag from, someone who's trading NFTs? Not as much.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, I'm with you on that for sure. We got to look at like what are the useful applications. In that vein, like one of the things that I'm excited about, and I don't know how much time you spent looking at this, but new technologies in agriculture. And actually thinking about the Ukrainian example right now, where food security now is even under more pressure, sadly, because of the situation there. There's so many new technologies coming where artificial intelligence is able to reduce water consumption, reduce fertilizer and pesticide consumption, and at the same time increase yields of crops. And I just wondered what you thought about that, because it's the same issue, right? Farmers are thinking like, is this going to destroy my life, or is this going to somehow make things better? And they tend to, unfortunately, land at fear to start.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's changing. Like two things. So I just joined the board of GFI, which is a plant-based Canadian company that has a number of plants out west,
Amazing.
doing things like pea protein, and super excited to get immersed in that world
Oh,
of the
cool.
future of
Yeah.
plant-based food. So that to me is fascinating because I'm so close to the tech world. It's nice to actually deal with something kind of tangible. And the second part of that is AI in agriculture is incredibly exciting. I mean, just if you think about all of the different examples, a couple of years ago, I spent some time on a dairy farm, and I was there to kind of learn how they were using technology. This was one farm outside of Toronto that had really embraced all different types of tools, AI, Fitbits for cows,
Oh,
and
cool.
the farmers were so excited because they said, listen, we used to get up at 3:30 in the morning to go and milk these cows. Now these cows, when they need to be milked, basically walk up to a machine, they get milked, they get relief, and then they leave. And we're able through these tags to see the health of the cows, all of this data at our fingertips through the computer in our home or in the barn.
Amazing, right? Wow.
And yeah, and it had changed the quality of their life. Like, what benefit is there on having so much physical labor in your life that you can't walk by the time you're 50? I mean, we have to sort of think more long term about some of these things, and I think that's a great example.
I totally agree. That's a really great point that I hadn't even thought of, right? Is that the physical strain of the life that the farmers have to live today is incredible. And you're right. By the time they're 50, they've been worn out.
They're like the
in many.
NHL players, man.
Yeah,
They're
right.
it's done. I don't know anything about hockey, so
No,
I
right.
apologize.
Well, I played, and I still don't know anything about hockey, so it doesn't make any sense at all. The last one I wanted to sort of ask you also about today's obviously hot topic of like hybrid work and sort of technologies around hybrid work. Are you seeing anything yet that's sort of like, wow, okay, I can see how that new technology is going to be integrated into our daily professional and personal lives to make hybrid work easier, more efficient, more productive?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I'm such a fan, if it's possible, to allow people to work where they're most productive. I was super
yeah,
excited. I don't know if you saw the news from Airbnb, where their
I
CEO
did.
just announced like
Yeah,
5 steps to be able to allow people to work where they wanted to work. They weren't going to reduce compensation. I mean, so many great layers of how they're giving freedom and flexibility to employees. Imagine how many resumes they're getting right now just because of
amazing.
that
Right.
move.
Yeah,
But I don't think we've gone all the way in terms of having the technology in place to allow us to build relationships. Like I think Zoom, as much as I use it on a regular basis and love it, I think we're going to look back at Zoom kind of like we looked back on like ICQ chat. I
yeah,
don't know if
I
I'm dating
agree.
myself.
Yeah.
Okay, you know what I'm talking
No,
about.
I definitely knew what it was.
Like Netscape. Like I don't know if they're the company that's going to transform work from a technology standpoint. I think there's got to be some player that comes in where it really is built with collaboration and real life working scenarios in mind. And unless Zoom makes some
Agree.
big changes, they're not going to be the one.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I've been trying to find an interesting hybrid tech platform to invest in, and the only thing I've seen interesting so far is a couple of real estate businesses that are sort of approaching landlords and trying to acquire a whole building and then turning that entire building into a complete hybrid work environment. So sort of
Ah,
taking over all the leases, sort of the traditional tenants, and then turning the whole building into something that can be hybrid long term, and really not have any big company or small company have to sign any lease because everything just becomes on demand. It's sort of
interesting.
like an Uberization of office space. I don't know if
Yeah.
that is the right way to think about it, but I thought that was interesting. We'll see where it
Yeah.
goes. But
I think there's lots of room to see
yeah,
some creative solutions. Like I'm still amazed that every company at a certain scale doesn't have a sort of TV studio in their offices. Like to me, it feels like that would be the most beneficial thing to have in your office right now is a place where you could have your CEO constantly, being interviewed as a thought leader, doing podcasts, shooting content. Like that
agree.
is the one piece that people seem to have not caught on to. And I don't get it. I mean, it should be part of the infrastructure. Like every business should have a studio if you have the space, and that studio could be rented out when not used, but there's a need for this, right? Like I'm dying over here. I'm super
Yeah,
busy. So
yeah,
we need more of these.
yeah. Like that makes tons of sense, right? You would think that big companies would have all jumped on that already. I know some of them have studios, but to your earlier point about television, like they've done it in the more legacy model, right? It's the big, I think of like banks that have studios and they just do it like, they might as well just be its traditional television studio, right? They're not doing it, call it for next gen. But speaking about next gen, I know you talk a lot in all the different engagements you have about 5G and what's going on in terms of the new applications we can expect to see in 5G. This is obviously a topic that's near and dear to my heart, but I'm wondering what you think is going to be where 5G is going to have the biggest impact on our lives.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we've probably talked about two of the industries that are the most interesting. Agriculture is one. I've done some work in the 5G space when it comes to agriculture and just the possibilities that exist on farms because of enablement of 5G networks. I think healthcare is fascinating as well. I mean, everybody always uses the example, like you're in a northern community, someone needs to be able to see a patient and potentially, perform an operation that's done by a machine on one end. You don't want to be on these, old legacy cellular networks where things are delayed. You want to make sure you have leading infrastructure. And of course, transportation and autonomous vehicles. I think that's probably one of the most obvious. Although, I mean, I think we'll probably both agree on this. Like, we're not going to see autonomous cars on the 401 in Toronto anytime soon, but maybe shuttle buses and, some limited use of transportation, and 5G will be important to the evolution of that as well.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that day though, when there's not traffic jams because everybody has to go the same speed, And I'm a super slow driver, so I'm actually looking forward to not having to drive anymore because I really should not be on the road.
Yeah, but there's some of these things that just, maybe people love driving, but there's some of these things that may be taken away from us that will not be such a bad thing. Like I always tell people, if you think about the rate of accidents on the road, I mean, thousands of people are killed every single year. And if new technologies can reduce that even by 80, 90% with autonomous vehicles, why wouldn't we go in that direction, right?
I totally agree, right?
What are we holding on to, right? Humans are flawed in many ways, and we're good at some things, but not everything.
Yeah, I mean, some people are trying, I guess, right, to be more productive on the commute. So people are going in that direction, like podcasts, and I'm learning something, but you're still your attention for an hour a day still has to be on the road. And in some respects, like the podcast or whatever you're doing is a dangerous distraction in some ways. So I think I agree. I think the sooner we get, I know you're right. People are going to resist that because there are a lot of people that love driving, but I think that's something where 5G, and I do agree, it's years away still, but wow, that's going to be transformational, I think, to the productivity of everyone and to the safety of everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's so many use case scenarios in terms of how 5G could help us. I even did a video recently talking about 5G in education and mixed reality. And, imagine if we had that during the pandemic. I was one of those parents who was, devastated to see my son sitting in front of a Zoom screen for days and days on end with, no movement, physically just not even moving.
Oh my gosh.
That's insane, right?
It's just not healthy.
It's not, and that's not state of the art. So I think that we have to understand the sort of potential that exists. That's why I'm always excited about tech. But I'll be honest with you, it's hard for me to bring everybody along because many people are very doubtful.
Amber, listen, I really appreciate the conversation. I hope we can have another one soon. And I really appreciate you sharing everything about AmberMac Media. And so on that vein, before we wrap up, what is next for AmberMac Media? Where are you taking it from here? Where can I find you in 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, probably one of the biggest decisions that we made and I made personally, because we're still a small company under 10 employees, is that I am cutting back almost completely on travel in terms of speaking at events all around the world for a couple of reasons. One is just climate change in general. I don't want to be doing a lot of long haul flights, and I can do a lot more on the ground here. And secondly, to your point about sitting in a car and not able to do anything else, I realized what an ineffective use of my time it was, spending 3 days traveling for a 1 hour event where I can do so much more, reach so many more people in studio. So we're just going to continue to ramp up our productions in the studio and take advantage of every minute that we have in here. And I think climate will continue to be kind of an area of focus where we start to work with partners. And we've already done this year. We just finished a consumer tech Earth Day campaign where we're actually choosing partners that have sustainability and climate at the core of what they do.
Oh, amazing. Amazing. Well, I look forward to seeing that content.
All right. Well, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Amber. Amazing.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Trailblaze. Would love to hear from you. Tweet me or comment on LinkedIn or Instagram and share what you took away from this episode. This show was produced by Creator Club Studios. You can start creating today at creatorclubstudios.com.